Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming back. Today I've got 6 chilling true cruise ship horror stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching, so YouTube will keep showing you stories like this. Now, let's begin. I've been putting off talking about this, but I need to get it out there. I'm an art restorer, Samuel Reyes, and I work with paintings, mostly Renaissance stuff, the kind of projects where you're hunched over a canvas for 14 hours straight with a magnifying lens and a brush the width of an eyelash. I'd just finished a 2-year commission on a Caravaggio reproduction, and I was burned out. My hands had that permanent tremor from precision work, and I couldn't look at anything without analyzing its composition. So, I booked a cruise, 7 days in the Caribbean. I just wanted to stare at the ocean and not think. The cabin was fine, small, but I didn't need much. Queen bed, little porthole window, bathroom the size of a closet. But on the second morning when I woke up and looked at the ceiling, I noticed something. A smudge, faint, almost translucent, like someone had breathed on the paint and left a fog print. It was maybe 6 inches across, centered directly above the bed. I figured it was a water stain. Ships are humid, metal expands and contracts. Made sense. I grabbed a wet cloth from the bathroom and wiped at it. The cloth came away clean. The smudge didn't budge. I wiped harder. Nothing. Then I realized the mark wasn't on the surface. It was underneath. Behind the paint somehow, like it was stained into the metal itself. I told myself to let it go. It wasn't my problem, but I'm trained to look at surfaces, to see things most people miss, and I couldn't stop staring at it. By the 3rd day, the smudge had grown. Not dramatically, but enough that I knew I wasn't imagining it. It was maybe 8 inches now and darker. The edges were sharper, less diffuse. I lay in bed that night with the lights off, and I could still see it. A gray oval suspended above me. On the 4th morning, I could make out a shape. My breath caught when I saw it, and I had to sit up and blink a few times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. The smudge had stretched vertically, and there was a suggestion of contours, rounded at the top, narrower at the bottom, like a head and neck. I went to the front desk and asked if someone could check my cabin. The guy was polite but dismissive. He said maintenance would take a look, but when I came back that evening, nothing had changed. No note, no sign anyone had been there. I called again. They sent someone up, a young guy in coveralls who glanced at the ceiling, shrugged and said he didn't see anything unusual. He stood right under it. I pointed. He squinted, said it just looked like a shadow to me, and left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights on and stared at the ceiling, and I swear it was darker than it had been that morning. The shape was unmistakable now. A face, oval, smooth, tilted slightly downward, like someone looking at the bed below, at me. By the 5th day, I could see features. Not clearly, but enough to know they were there. The faint impression of a nose, the vague contours of a mouth, but no eyes. Where the eyes should have been, there was nothing. Just smooth, unbroken surface, like they'd been erased or never existed at all. The face was large now, maybe 2 feet across, and it felt deliberate, intentional, like someone had carved it into the ceiling from the inside. I stopped going to meals. I stayed in the cabin and watched it. I took photos, but they came out blurry, the smudge barely visible in the images, even though it was stark and clear to my eyes. I called the front desk again, more insistent this time, and they sent the same guy. He looked at me like I was losing it, said he still didn't see anything, and suggested I get some air. On the 6th night, I woke up at 3 in the morning, and the face was directly above me, fully formed. The mouth was slightly open, like it was trying to speak or breathe. The absence of eyes was the worst part. It wasn't just empty. It was deliberate, like whoever this was had been blinded or had never needed to see in the first place. I couldn't look away. My chest felt tight, my hands were shaking, and I realized I hadn't taken a full breath in what felt like minutes. I packed my things and slept in one of the deck lounges for the last night. When we docked, I didn't even go back to the cabin. I left everything I couldn't carry. That was 4 months ago. I haven't been on a ship since. I haven't worked on a ceiling mural since either. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. I looked up the ship's history after I got home. 3 years ago, a passenger went missing. Male, mid-40s. They found his belongings in his cabin, but he was never seen again. The cabin number matched mine. Look, I'm not the kind of person who gets spooked easily, but I need to tell someone about this. My name's Caleb Hayes, and 3 weeks ago I started working security on the Meridian Star, one of those big luxury cruise ships. It was my first real security job, overnight shift, and they had me patrolling the upper decks. Pool areas, spa, fitness center, easy work, quiet. At least, that's what I thought. The ship's pool deck has 3 pools, 2 smaller ones for kids and a main one that's Olympic-sized, heated to 85 degrees year-round. Part of my rounds involved checking the temperature gauges and making sure the automated systems were running. I'd done it 4 nights in a row without issue, but on the 5th night, my 3 a.m. check, something was off. The air felt wrong before I even got to the pools, colder than it should have been. I could see my breath, which didn't make sense. The deck was climate-controlled, and it was 72 degrees everywhere else on the ship. But up there, near the main pool, it felt like walking into a freezer. I checked the gauge on the wall first. It read 40 degrees. I stared at it, thinking the sensor had malfunctioned. There was no way the water had dropped 45 degrees in an hour. I checked it at 2 a.m. and it was fine. I walked to the edge of the pool and looked down. The water was completely still. No ripples, no movement from the circulation system. It looked almost solid, like it had started to freeze but stopped just short. I crouched down and touched the surface with my fingers. It was ice cold, the kind of cold that burns. I pulled my hand back and wiped it on my pants, and that's when I noticed the foam. There were hundreds of them, perfectly circular rings of white foam, each one about the size of my palm, floating on the surface. They were spaced evenly across the entire pool, maybe a foot apart, and they weren't drifting randomly. They were moving, all of them, in unison, a slow, deliberate spiral pattern rotating inward toward the deep end. I stood there watching them for I don't know how long, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. The movement was too precise, too synchronized. There was no current, no jets running, but the rings kept rotating, all at the same speed, like they were being pulled by something underneath. My chest felt tight. I couldn't look away. I radioed down to engineering and told them the pool system was malfunctioning. The guy on the other end sounded half asleep and said he'd send someone up. I stayed by the edge, watching the foam rings. They were spiraling tighter now, converging toward the center of the deep end, and then, one by one, they started disappearing. Not dissolving, not sinking, just vanishing, like someone was plucking them out of existence. I grabbed the skimmer net from the equipment locker. I don't know why. I just needed to touch one, to prove to myself they were real. I leaned over the edge and reached the net toward the nearest ring. The second the mesh made contact, the ring disappeared, instantly. No splash, no residue, just gone. I tried again with another one. Same thing. I dipped the net into the water between two rings, and they kept moving, unbothered, like the net wasn't even there. The engineering guy showed up maybe 10 minutes later. By the time he got there, all the rings were gone. The water was still freezing, still motionless, but the surface was clear. He checked the system panel, said the heater was running fine and the temperature should be back to normal by morning. He didn't seem concerned. I asked him about the foam, and he just shrugged and said it was probably a chemical imbalance. He left. I stayed up there for another hour, watching the pool. The temperature gauge didn't move. The water didn't move. At 4:30 a.m., I checked it again. Still 40 degrees. But by 6 a.m., when my shift ended and the morning crew came on, the gauge read 85. The water looked normal. Nobody believed me when I told them what I'd seen. The next night, I requested a different patrol route. They reassigned me to the lower decks, and I didn't argue. But 2 nights later, I was covering for someone and had to do the pool deck again. 3 a.m. I didn't want to check the gauge, but I had to. It was my job. 85 degrees. Everything normal. I exhaled and turned to leave. But then I looked at the water. Just for a second, just to make sure. The surface was still. And there, in the very center of the deep end, was a single white foam ring, perfectly circular, perfectly still. I didn't go near it. I logged my check and left. That was 2 weeks ago. I put in my notice yesterday. My last shift is in 3 days, and I'm not going anywhere near that pool. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. I looked up the ship's maintenance logs after that first night. The pool system had been completely replaced 6 months ago. New heater, new filtration, everything. The reason? A passenger drowned in the deep end. They said it was an accident, but the autopsy showed the water in his lungs was near freezing in the middle of summer, with the heater running. I've spent 32 years at sea, and I've never questioned what I've seen until 3 nights ago. My name's Frank Costello, Senior Deck Officer, and this was supposed to be my last voyage before retirement. 14 days across the Atlantic, then I'd be done. But something happened on the bridge that I can't reconcile with anything I know about navigation, about the ocean, about reality. We were 4 days out from Southampton, making good time. Clear skies, calm seas, everything by the book. I was on the overnight watch, midnight to 4 a.m., and the bridge was quiet. Just me and the hum of the instruments. I'd checked our position 3 times that hour, GPS, backup GPS, and the paper charts for good measure. We were exactly where we were supposed to be, heading due west across open water. Nothing around us for 500 nautical miles in any direction. I walked to the starboard window to stretch my legs. Force of habit. I've done it 10,000 times. You look out. You see the horizon. You see the stars. You see nothing but ocean. Except this time, I saw land. It was distant, maybe 15 miles out, but unmistakable. A coastline, dark and jagged, rising up from the water like broken teeth. I froze. My first thought was that we'd drifted off course somehow, but that was impossible. The autopilot was engaged, the GPS was locked, and I'd just confirmed our position. There was no land anywhere near our route. I stared at it for maybe 5 seconds before my eyes started watering, and I had to blink. When I opened them again, it was gone. Just ocean. Flat, empty ocean stretching to the horizon. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I'd stared at the instruments too long and was seeing after images. I looked back out the window. Nothing. I went back to the chart table and rechecked everything. GPS showed us in the middle of the Atlantic, exactly on course. The depth sounder read 3,000 meters. Open ocean, no land, no shoals, nothing. I told myself I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. I'd been awake for 18 hours. It happened. But 20 minutes later, I looked out the starboard window again, and it was there. The same coastline, the same distance, the same position. Only this time I noticed the sky above it. It wasn't the same sky as the rest of the horizon. It was darker. A deep, bruised indigo, like the color of a bad storm, but there was no storm. The rest of the sky was clear, stars visible, moon bright. Just over that landmass, the sky was wrong. I forced myself to keep looking. My eyes started burning after a few seconds, the same way they do when you stare at something too bright. But this wasn't bright. It was just wrong. The longer I looked, the more detail I could see. There were structures along the coast, not buildings exactly, but shapes. Vertical, irregular, too tall and too narrow to be natural formations. And the water between the ship and the land, it wasn't moving. No waves, no current. It looked like glass. I blinked and it was gone again. Just ocean. I backed away from the window and sat down at the chart table. My hands were shaking. I'd been through hurricanes, engine fires, medical emergencies. I don't shake, but I couldn't stop. I didn't tell anyone. What was I going to say? That I was seeing phantom islands in the middle of the Atlantic? On my last voyage? They'd think I was losing it. And maybe I was. I stayed away from the starboard windows for the rest of my watch. When my relief came on at 4 a.m., I went straight to my cabin and didn't sleep. The next night I was back on the bridge. Same shift, same route. I told myself I wouldn't look. I'd keep my eyes on the instruments, do my job, and get through the watch. But at 2 a.m., I couldn't help it. I walked to the starboard window. It was there. Closer this time, maybe 10 miles out. The coastline was clearer now, and I could see the structures more distinctly. They weren't ruins. They looked deliberate, purposeful, like they'd been built recently. And the sky, God, the sky. It was darker, more bruised, and it was spreading. The indigo was bleeding outward, creeping toward the normal sky like ink in water. I stared at it longer this time, ignoring the burning in my eyes. I needed to understand what I was seeing. The coastline didn't move. It stayed fixed, relative to the ship, which didn't make sense. If it was real land, we should have been passing it, leaving it behind, but it stayed there, locked in place like it was following us. Then I noticed something in the water between the ship and the land. Movement, not waves, something beneath the surface. Large shapes, too big to be whales, moving in formation, parallel to the ship. I counted 4 of them, maybe 5, before my vision blurred and I had to look away. When I looked back, everything was normal. Ocean, stars, nothing. I checked the GPS again. We were still on course. I checked the radar. Nothing within 100 miles. I radioed down to the engine room and asked if they'd noticed anything unusual. They said no. Everything was normal. We dock in 2 days. I haven't looked out the starboard window since that second night. I've told the captain I'm taking early leave, medical reasons, and he didn't question it. But here's what keeps me awake. I pulled the ship's log from 30 years ago, the first voyage I ever worked. Different ship, same route. There's a note from the senior deck officer at the time, marked and then crossed out. It just says, "Starboard sightings, no explanation, do not log." He retired 2 weeks after that voyage. I looked him up yesterday. He died 6 months later. The obituary said natural causes, but it also mentioned he'd been found staring out a window. I know how this is going to sound, but I swear every word of this is true. My name's Marcus Holt, and I do structural inspections for marine equipment, mostly lifeboats. I'm a contractor, so I move from ship to ship, checking hull integrity, testing mechanisms, that kind of thing. 3 weeks ago, I was hired for a routine inspection on the Pacific Dawn, a mid-sized cruise liner. Standard job. In and out in 2 days. Except it didn't work out that way. They put me on the night shift because the boats had to stay accessible during the day for drills and regulations. Fine by me. Less people around, easier to work. The lifeboat bays on A deck are deep in the ship, below the passenger areas, and at 2 a.m., they're completely empty. Just rows of lifeboats hanging in their davits, all sealed and prepped for emergency deployment. I was working on Lifeboat 14, running a hull scan with my ultrasonic gauge, when I heard it. A scraping sound, rhythmic, deliberate, metal on fiberglass, or something harder dragging across the inside surface. It was coming from Lifeboat 12, 2 boats down from where I was standing. I stopped what I was doing and listened. The sound was consistent. 3 scrapes, pause, 3 scrapes, pause. Like someone was testing the hull from the inside, trying to find a weak point. My first thought was that someone had gotten locked in during maintenance, but that didn't make sense. The boats were sealed after inspection. No one had any reason to be inside them. I walked over to Lifeboat 12 and stood next to it. The scraping was louder now, clearer, definitely coming from inside. I leaned in close to the hull and put my hand against the fiberglass. It was cold, colder than it should have been. And then I felt it, a faint vibration with each scrape, like something pressing hard from the other side. I called out, asked if anyone was in there. No response. Just the scraping. 3 times. Pause. 3 times. Pause. I circled the boat, looking for damage or tampering. The seal was intact. The hatch was locked. Everything looked normal, but the sound kept going. Then I saw the indentation. Small at first, maybe the size of a quarter, appearing on the hull right where the scraping was loudest. The fiberglass was pushing outward, like something was pressing against it from inside. I watched it grow, slowly. The surface became wet, slick, like condensation was forming, but only in that one spot. The rest of the hull was dry. I backed up. My mouth was dry and my hands felt numb. I've inspected thousands of lifeboats. I know how they're built, how they're sealed, what kind of pressure they can take. This wasn't normal. This wasn't possible. The scraping stopped. The indentation stayed, wet and slightly raised, like a blister on the hull. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the ship's ventilation system and the distant sound of the engines. Then I made a decision I regret. I grabbed my tools and cut the seal on the hatch. It took me 3 minutes to get through the tamper-proof fasteners, and the whole time I kept expecting the scraping to start again, but it didn't. When I finally got the hatch open, I pulled it wide and looked inside. The lifeboat was empty, completely empty. No equipment had been moved, no sign of forced entry, nothing out of place. The interior was bone dry and cold, colder than the hull had been. I climbed halfway in and checked the walls, looking for the indentation I'd seen from the outside. There was nothing. The fiberglass was smooth, undamaged, but the smell hit me hard. Brine, salt water, and something else underneath it. Metallic. Like old blood or rust, but sharper. I backed out of the lifeboat and closed the hatch. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was a pressure issue, some kind of structural anomaly I'd never seen before, but I didn't believe it. I stood there trying to rationalize what I'd just seen, and that's when the scraping started again. Lifeboat 13, right next to 12, same rhythm. 3 scrapes, pause, 3 scrapes, pause. I turned and stared at it. The sound was identical. Same pressure, same tempo. And then I saw the indentation forming on its hull in the exact same spot as before, wet, raised, growing slowly. I didn't open that one. I stepped back and watched. The scraping continued for maybe 2 minutes, then stopped. The indentation stayed. I looked down the line of lifeboats. There were 24 total on this deck. And I had the worst thought I've ever had in my life. What if it moves through all of them? I grabbed my equipment and left. I went up to the main deck and found the night supervisor, told him there was a pressure issue in the lifeboat bay and that I needed to reschedule the inspection. He didn't question it. I went back to my cabin and didn't sleep. The next night, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Lack of sleep, stress, whatever. I went back down to A deck at midnight, determined to finish the job. I walked into the bay and looked at lifeboat 12. The indentation was gone. The hull was smooth. I checked lifeboat 13. Also smooth, no marks, no damage, nothing. I started working on lifeboat 15, trying to put it out of my mind. I got about 20 minutes in before I heard it again. The scraping. I didn't want to look. I kept my eyes on my work, but the sound got louder. It was coming from lifeboat 16 now. 3 scrapes, pause, 3 scrapes. I looked. The indentation was forming, wet and raised. I watched it spread, and then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The wet surface wasn't condensation. It was too thick, too viscous. It was seeping through the fiberglass from the inside. I got closer and touched it. My finger came away slick and cold, and when I looked at it under my flashlight, it was faintly pink, like diluted blood. I left. I didn't pack my tools, didn't log out, just walked off the ship that night and didn't come back. I emailed the company the next day and said I couldn't complete the contract. They threatened to sue me for breach, but I didn't care. I wasn't going back. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't taken another ship job since. But 2 days ago, I got a call from a friend who works maritime safety. He asked if I'd heard about the Pacific Dawn. I said no. He told me they'd found something during a routine lifeboat drill. Lifeboat 24, the last one in the bay, had a hull breach. A hole, perfectly circular, about the size of a fist, punched through from the inside. The interior was soaked with seawater, even though the boat had never been deployed. They couldn't explain it. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I just thanked him and hung up. But I keep thinking about the scraping, the rhythm. 3 scrapes. Pause, 3 scrapes. 24 lifeboats on that deck. I heard it in 4 of them. That leaves 20. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks, honestly. Look, I'm an ordinary guy, Martin Shaw. I'm a maintenance diver. I inspect hulls for a living. Tankers, bulk carriers mostly, but sometimes the big cruise ships. I'm a pretty rational person for context. If you told me 3 months ago I'd be talking about something like this, I would have laughed. This all happened on the ocean's embrace, a massive thing, a floating city docked near Fiji for a 24-hour stopover. The water was warm, maybe 82 degrees, but dark, deep dark. I was down there in the afternoon, maybe 40 feet below the surface, doing my usual grid pattern, checking the stabilizer fins and the rudder for any scrapes or fouling before they headed out again. It's monotonous work. That's why I noticed it immediately. I was focused on the aft section, shining my light across the steel, and there it was. A figure, clinging to the hull, maybe 20 feet above the keel, right near the propeller housing. I froze. My breath hitched, the regulator clicking in the silence. It was a man, I thought. No, maybe a woman. It was wearing dark, plain clothes. No diving gear, no tank, no fins. Just gripping the metal of the hull, motionless. I figured maybe it was a stowaway somehow, maybe dead, though I couldn't imagine how they got down there. I swam closer, getting my light right on it. The figure was facing the hull, head down. Then very slowly it tilted its head up, and I got a look at its face. It wasn't a face exactly. It was smooth, pale, and completely blank. No eyebrows, no discernible lips, no wrinkles. But the eyes, they were open, large, and perfectly round, reflecting my light like two polished black stones, and they were staring right at me, staring. I shot back maybe 5 feet of water. The movement was involuntary. My whole suit suddenly felt 3 sizes too small, and a cold sweat broke out on my neck, even in that tropical water. I signaled to the topside crew immediately, just the standard, "Something is wrong, bring me up" sign, then started checking the area again. When I looked back, the figure was gone, just the green, algae-covered steel of the hull. The topside supervisor, a guy named Gary, sounded annoyed when I got back on deck. I told him what I saw. He just gave me this flat look and said, "Martin, you've been working too many hours. We ran the sonar. There's nothing down there." I knew what he was thinking. Sunstroke, nitrogen narcosis, whatever. I'm a professional. I know the difference between a shadow and a human form. I argued for a while, but it was useless. They had a schedule. They had a job to do. They told me to rest, get some air, and go back down to finish the inspection in 2 hours. The second dive was worse. The water had gotten a little murkier, and I was running on pure adrenaline. I kept flashing the light around, half expecting that smooth, pale face to be right in front of the dome. I was inspecting the forward sonar array when I saw them again. Not 1, 3, all identical to the first. Same dark clothes, same blank faces, same big black empty eyes. They were spaced maybe 10 feet apart, holding onto the curves and protrusions of the bow-like insects. And they were all staring at me. No aggression, no malice, just observation. God, even now telling this makes my hands shake. What got me wasn't the faces, it was the position. They were all slightly closer to my position than the first one had been. They hadn't moved since the last dive. They were just there. It felt like they had been clinging to the hull the whole time, riding the ship, waiting for me to come back. I got out of there. No signals, no professional signs. I just pulled myself up the descent line like a frantic monkey. When I ripped the helmet off on deck, Gary just gave me that look again. "It's 3 of them now, Gary," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're just staring." I told him I was done, finished. They could hire someone else, but the cruise ship was sailing out at midnight and they were short-handed. Gary insisted. He offered me triple pay and a free flight home, saying just one more pass on the rudder and I could go. I hated myself, but I took the deal. I had bills, and I told myself it had to be a hallucination, a stress reaction, something I could explain later. The final dive. It was dark now, midnight black, the lights from the portholes cutting sickly yellow shafts into the gloom. The ship's engines were running, a deep thrumming vibration passing right through the hull into my bones. I swam straight for the rudder section, terrified and rushing, barely checking the panels, and I didn't see any of them. No figures, no pale, smooth faces. They were gone. I felt a huge, immediate wave of relief so strong it almost made me cry in my mask. I was getting ready to ascend when I felt a slight tug on my oxygen line. It was nothing heavy, just a slight pull, like the line was snagged on something. I stopped, giving the line a small shake to free it. I looked down, trying to see where it was tangled, but it was just a mess of dark green rope disappearing into the blackness under the stern. Then the tugging started again, not a snag, a steady, deliberate pulling, down. The ocean's embrace gave a low, deafening groan as it began to pull away from the dock. The propeller began to churn, slow at first, then faster. I fought the line, pulling upward, but it was like it was anchored. The vibration of the engines was so loud now it felt like my teeth were going to shatter, and I could hear, very faintly over the engine noise, a new sound, a scraping, like fingernails on wet steel. And then I felt it, not on the line, on my ankle. A cold, surprisingly strong grip. My light beam was shaking too hard to focus, but I saw the pale hand for a fraction of a second. It was holding me, pulling. The other hand grabbed my shin. I kicked out, but it didn't let go. I felt a third hand, then a fourth, pulling on my suit, trying to drag me down and back toward the enormous, churning propeller. I screamed, but the sound was trapped in my mask. The hands were cold and slick, and they were identical, just like the faces. The line snapped, or I pulled it free, I don't know which, and I shot up, bursting through the surface like a torpedo, coughing up brine, blood from my nose, tearing my mask off. I looked back. The ocean's embrace was maybe 200 feet out, already accelerating into the open ocean. It looked like a castle of white lights leaving me behind. I was picked up by a harbor patrol boat a few minutes later, floating, shaking, with what looked like pale, circular bruises all over my legs. The patrol guy just said it was a miracle I hadn't been pulled into the props. I didn't tell him about the hands. Last week I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a large, polished black stone, perfectly round. It looked exactly like one of their eyes. I need to tell someone about what happened on my honeymoon cruise, because I can't keep pretending it didn't. I'm a hospital inventory manager. I spend my days tracking supplies, managing shortages, making sure everything's accounted for. I deal in facts and numbers, not whatever the hell this was. Sarah and I booked the cruise to get away from work stress. 7 days through the Caribbean, our cabin on deck 9 with a balcony overlooking open water. The second morning, I'm standing at the bathroom mirror, and I notice something tucked into the corner of the frame. A small laminated card, maybe 2 inches square. I pull it out, figuring it's some spa promotion or drink voucher the staff left. It's a photograph. Low quality, grainy like it was taken through a dirty lens. It shows the view from a ship's balcony. Ocean, railing, deck chair. My deck chair. My exact balcony setup. But the sky in the photo is this sick, greenish black, and the ocean's whipped into these massive swells. Rain or sea spray blurs everything. I check outside. Clear blue sky, calm water. We haven't had any weather at all. I show it to Sarah. She glances at it, shrugs, says maybe it's from a previous cruise, some weird promotional thing. I try to find any text on it, any company logo. Nothing. Just this unsettling photo of a storm that never happened. I decide to report it at the front desk after breakfast, but when I go back to grab it, the card's gone. I check the floor, the counter, the trash. Sarah says I probably knocked it somewhere, but I know I left it right by the sink. She's already annoyed that I'm fixating on something so minor during our honeymoon, so I drop it. That afternoon, I'm washing my hands in a public restroom near the pool deck. There's a large mirror above the sinks, and as I'm drying off, I see it. Another card, identical size, wedged into the bottom corner of the mirror frame. My stomach drops before I even pull it out. Same grainy quality. This one shows the main pool area, but the deck chairs are overturned, and that same horrific storm sky looms overhead. Water's flooding across the deck. I can see the hot tub in the photo, and there's something dark floating in it that I don't look at too closely. I pocket the card and head straight to guest services. The woman at the desk listens politely while I explain. She asks to see the card. I reach into my pocket. It's not there. I check my other pockets, pat down my shorts. Gone. She's giving me this patient smile, and I realize how I sound. Sarah's right there looking embarrassed, and I just say, never mind, must have misplaced it. But I start checking. Every mirror, every reflective surface I pass. The elevator on the way back to our cabin. There's a card in the corner of the brushed metal panel. This one shows the ship's theater, seats empty, same storm visible through the portholes. I grab it immediately, keep my hand clenched around it. I don't even make it back to the hallway before my palms empty. Look, I know what you're thinking. Stress, hallucination, overwork, whatever. I thought that too. Sarah certainly thinks I need to relax and stop obsessing. But that night I find another one in our cabin's full-length closet mirror. The photo shows the main dining room, but the floor's tilted at this impossible angle, tables and chairs piled against one wall. The storm outside the windows looks worse, if that's possible. I stop telling Sarah when I find them. Over the next 2 days, I find 11 more cards. The gym mirror, the bathroom mirror in the cafe, a decorative mirror in the library. Each photo shows a different part of the ship, always in that same nightmare storm, always in chaos. The buffet with food and dishes scattered everywhere. The kids' club with toys floating in ankle-deep water. The casino with playing cards plastered against the windows. I'm not sleeping. I'm checking every mirror obsessively, and I'm starting to notice details. In the background of several photos, I can see shapes that might be people, but they're never in focus. And the timestamps, because there are timestamps, tiny numbers in the corner I didn't notice at first, they're sequential. They're counting up to something. On the 6th night, I find the last card in the bathroom mirror of our cabin. I'm alone. Sarah's at the evening show I was too anxious to attend. This photo is different. It's not showing the ship during the storm. It's just our cabin door. A close-up, sharp enough that I can see the room number clearly. There's a deep, jagged gouge across the blue paint. It runs diagonally from the handle to the corner, like something tried to claw or force its way through. The metal underneath is exposed, bright and raw. I can see splintered wood at the edges. I walk out of the bathroom and stand in front of our actual door. The paint is perfect. Pristine blue, slightly glossy under the hallway lights. I put my hand flat against it just to feel the smooth, undamaged surface. We disembarked the next morning. The cruise ended without incident. No storm, no emergency, nothing. Sarah said the trip helped her relax, even if I was weird about mirrors the whole time. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. That photo of our door. The timestamp said 11:47 p.m. The date was 3 days from now. We're home now, and that date's coming up tomorrow night. I keep checking our front door, running my hand over the paint, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do if I'm right about what those cards were showing me.